Welcome to Good Thinking. I am very glad you're all here for today's conversation, and it's a conversation versus just a live streaming. So hopefully all of you are going to participate, starting out with letting us know who you are and where you're from, because that's the first thing. Welcome to all of the new good thinkers who are here to spend a little bit of time setting aside all the time we spend on what to think so we can luxuriate in thinking about our thinking to improve how we think. And welcome to all of you seasoned good thinkers who have been such an incredible part of this year-long journey in good thinking. We have been at it for a year. So we're here almost every Monday, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, right here on LinkedIn Live and streaming live from YouTube. Rachid, welcome, good thinker, a beautiful mind. Welcome to Good Thinking this week. Stay tuned. You'll see, become part of the conversation, and you'll see how fun it is to just give ourselves this little bit of time each week. All right, so let's get to it. Today's topic is an interesting one, and I put Chesterton's fence, which didn't draw a lot of people to sign up for the event. Because I think they're thinking, what does a fence have anything to do with anything? So I'm going to say hi to Michael from sunny Toronto. Nice. Barkley from DC. So we're starting to get people from all over. Stephen, greetings from the birthplace of the tater tot. Okay, I love tater tots. How many of you prefer tater tots A to French fries B? Just put tater tots. Tater tots or French fries? I'm going to say tater tots. I didn't know it was because I live in the birthplace of the tater tot. All right, so as you're putting your tater tots, French fries, comments in, we're going to get started on our topic. So when you think of something that you think might be outdated, like, okay, that's outdated, what comes to mind? Maybe it's a policy your company has. Maybe it's a rule you had for your kids, like, oh, you can only watch, cartoons between 5 and 6 or something like that. Or maybe it's a physical structure like a fence or play structure or something. When you think of something that is outdated, what comes to mind? Okay. Okay. I don't know what that is. What is that, Michael? Is that a French something? Is that a French for French fry or something? Jack, welcome from New Mexico. All right. So when you think of something that's outdated, what comes to mind? And think about the normalized institutions that had to change, were kind of ranked out from under us as a result of COVID. So what comes to mind? Maybe it's working in an office or learning in a classroom or attending a large indoor sporting event or concert, things that have now become distributed workforces and working from home, remote or Zoom school. So before we remove these old norms forever, it's important to understand a few reasons those institutions were norms in the first place. That is the subject of today's conversation. And it may be a little bit more nuanced than it seems. It's like, yeah, well, of course you should think about that. Aha, that's where Chesterton's fence comes in. Okay, so Michael says fries. Fries? You're a fries guy, not a tot guy? I got one for fries, you, and one for tots. Let's arm wrestle. And Jawad, welcome from Morocco, a place I have never been and really, really, really want to go. Working from an office has drastically changed post-COVID. So Arvid says that's one of the things where when you think of something that has changed or been subtracted, working in an office has been kind of subtracted. You could say working from home has been added, but it's really working from an office has been subtracted as a result of COVID. The question is, how many of these things that by necessity, that COVID necessitated, how many of those things should never go back, should go back entirely, or we should figure out if they should go back, and what is a good tool for deciding whether we should have not subtracted that stuff in the first place. And that's where we come to Chesterton's fence. And it brings us to today's topic. All right. So I'm going to take this banner off so we have more room, as I'd like to have room for all the comments. Welcome Ella Menu from Ethiopia. Excellent. I'm always trying to pronounce people's names correctly. is they're scrolling, and especially because people are coming from all over the world, and I love the diversity of viewpoints that this brings. Okay, so let's bring it to today's topic, and we'll start with this Chesterton's fence, which inspired President John F. Kennedy's one of his favorite sayings, which is, by the way, it's also a principle that Wikipedia requires or encourages their editors to follow. So let's see if you agree with this. Do not remove a fence until you know why it was put up in the first place. Do not remove a fence until you know why it was put up in the first place. And we're going to get into why this is maybe a little bit more fun to think about than just like the kind of the surface level thinking. This rule of thumb or heuristic was inspired by the writer and polymath GK Chesterton in his, and it was first put out in his 1929 book, The Thing, and it has come to be called Chesterton's fence. In the book, Chesterton describes a classic case of the reformer who sees something such as a fence and fails to see the reason for its existence. However, before they decide to remove it, he suggests, they must figure out why it exists in the first place, or why it was put in place in the first place. And if they do not do that, his suggestion is that they are likely to do more harm than good with its removal. And I'll quote Chesterton in just a minute. I'll read you his quote in just a minute. So think about that. All right. So Okay. We've got Carolyn from Kenya. Yay. Octavia from Brazil. Welcome, welcome. People from all over. So this is good. So what do you guys think? What do people think? What do you good thinkers think about this initial idea of Chesterton's fence? And I'll read you his quote. It's a little, it's written in that kind of old schooly language, but we'll tease it apart. He says, there exists in such a case a certain institution or law, let's say for the sake of simplicity, a fence or gate erected across a road. The more modern type of reformer goes gaily up to it and says, I don't see the use of it. Let's clear it away. To which, and this is his, certainly his bias, to which the more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer. This is a quote, so I don't want to get it wrong. If you don't see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Go away and think. Then when you come back and tell me that you do see the use of it, I may allow you to destroy it. What do you think? What do you think? Now, I want to warn you, this is not entirely non-controversial, particularly because it has kind of developed this more conservative patina. People talk about Chesterton's fence a lot in the conservative political spectrum, because it's been interpreted to mean that we should favor or maintain the status quo, or conserve the status quo, that we've always done it this way. But I would argue, let's take it out of that political arena and tease it apart. Let's use our good thinking to see how it can work and how it doesn't work. All right. So Abdurrashid says, I think that what people think of as laws or taxes. Okay, great. So what he thinks about when he thinks about things that might be outdated, I think that's a really good point. And then Ray, welcome, Ray. This is sort of classic management mistake of new leaders. There are going to be some big changes around here. Right. It is a classic mistake. And this, it may kind of come down to thinking about things as subtracting versus adding. So, but a lot of times there's this whole give and take that we should just, tear something down or remove something, rip it out, because the reasons behind it were maybe morally repugnant, whatever, which is a legitimate reason. But to not consider the reasons, and we're going to get into how to consider things kind of even the deeper levels of beyond kind of the sweeping moral judgments, we may see that this is a very useful tool. But there's another counter parable that will also apply. All right. So Abdurrashid says, judging things before recognizing the reason or they perceive from it from their personal reasons or personal use. Excellent. Yes. I got to get my rubber chickens. I should have been giving out rubber chickens already. For those of you who know rubber chickens. All right. So Michael says, is it a law or common sense? What if there is a mad bull on the other side or a dangerous pit? Yeah, excellent. So why was something constructed in the first place? Now, if there was a mad bull or dangerous pit, and that's why something was constructed, and now that mad bull or dangerous pit are no longer threats, now we're in the future, That's a perfectly acceptable under Chesterton. It's a perfectly acceptable thing. But his point was really, you should probably know that it was constructed because it needed to keep out a mad bull or a danger from people falling into a dangerous pit. So how is this different from Robert Frost's version? Here's poet Robert Frost's version, short. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out and to whom I was like to give offense. Now, that's okay because we're talking about offense, but what if we're not talking about offense? What if we're talking about a different kind of, a policy or a rule or a law that has, that might be morally inexcusable now. And it might be easy to just say, okay, because it was morally wrong and that's how people thought. And that's a completely legitimate reason to identify why something was in place. And I think that it helps to go a little deeper than that. So let's see. Stephen says, sometimes mature organizations want to change things just to shake off the corporate cobwebs or because Wall Street thinks it's the new. Yes, that's a very great point, a rubber chicken level point. And it's totally fine. But as Chesterton argues, fences don't grow out of the ground. Now, obviously, metaphorical fences we're talking about, nor do people build them in their sleep or during a fit of madness. Fences are built by people who usually, now he says carefully planned them out and had some reason for thinking the fence would be a good idea for somebody. I would argue some things were put in place certainly because they thought that they would be a good idea for somebody or themselves. I'm not sure that it necessarily required careful planning. Things are added all the time without careful planning. So I would kind of challenge that. But certainly fences were erected, that they benefited someone, maybe the person that put up the fence. Until we establish that reason, even if it was a bad reason, we have no business taking an axe to it. The reason may not be good or relevant. It might have not been good back then. It might have been good then and not good now. It might have been relevant then and not relevant now. We just need to be aware of what the reason is or was. Otherwise, we may end up with these unintended consequences. And we're going to get into this a little bit because these are, second and third order effects. So here's the question before we even get deeper into it. Yes or no? Do you agree or disagree with Chesterton's fence? Do you agree or disagree? Put it in the chat. We want to know, and let's see if you agree or disagree at the end. So, is removing something that has been in place for good or bad still appropriate or completely outdated reasons the same as never putting the thing up in the first place? So let's say something was put in place. Maybe it was a law. I'll use a controversial example here. So in the United States, there's a federal law against marijuana consumption, sale, blah, 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 blah. But many states have not only have decriminalized marijuana for all kinds of things. So now you have people that are in jail for offenses that people are making, tons of money on. I mean, they're just doing it every day. This is a law. Now, why was the law put in place? Well, you could say, a lot of people say, well, it was racist. Okay, well, why was it racist? Some people say the tobacco industry was behind the prohibition of marijuana, all the kinds of things. So here's the question, though. If you look at removing something and you just identify the reason that the law was there, is removing the law or removing the fence, removing the whatever policy, the same as never having instituted it or erected it in the first place? So, for example, is letting someone out of jail for a crime that is no longer a crime in many states, for example, is letting them out of jail the same as never incarcerating them in the first place? Well, no. They've had years where their liberty and their opportunities have been limited, but they've also had things happen to them. So what happens? You can say, okay, there's not a reason for erecting this fence, keeping it now, because we've identified the three reasons: keeping the bull in, not falling in the pit, borrowing from Michael's example. But now that we're going to take it out and it's been there, is it the same as having never been erected in the first place? Has it grown to mean something different when it was erected in the first place. And this is one of the limitations of Chesterton's fence, where people say, okay, if we've identified that, we don't need to identify, why it was there. We now know it's wrong. Chesterton's fence is a guideline. It's not a prescription. So let's get some comments in here. Stephen says he agrees with Chesterton's fence. Michael says err on the side of caution, ask first, and he agrees with Chesterton. Barclay says, I agree it's a good exercise, but not sufficient for change. How do you know the reason you came up with was the real reason? Ooh, we're going to get into that. That's a great question. Might have to give that one a rubber, all those three comments a rubber chicken. Abdurrashid says, I would say within the stream of time, when that fence being held at the time, the fence worked fine, but the fence is not flexible and will become outdated. Absolutely. And I think it's fair to identify why and acknowledge that it's no longer appropriate for whatever reason. And Abdurrashid says, because the future will bring new challenges and new circumstances, which will cause that fence to rust. Ooh, I like them continuing the metaphor. All right. Subtracting and adding are related, but they're different, and they require all kinds of good thinking. Considering second and third order effects is required by systems thinking, it's required by good thinking. So how many of you, let's try something fun. How many of you use the 5 whys? Maybe you're going to use Chesterton's fence for considering some policy. Well, we're going to try it with the Berlin Wall. But how many of you use the 5 whys in some way? Why? People, why? Could be 6, could be 4, 5 whys. It kind of has a ring to it. How many of you use the 5 whys? So we're going to try it with the Berlin Wall. Okay. Now you could say, oh, it was horrible. You can make a moral judgment about why it was constructed. And that might not get you the information you want. And I'm going to explain why it's better to set aside morality. I mean, it's certainly a reason, but it's better to set aside morality as you're looking at Chesterton's fence, the reasons, and then you can understand that there's a moral judgment thing that can certainly be, but set it aside and I'll show you how. So why was the Berlin Wall erected? Who wants to take a shot? Why was the Berlin Wall erected? Well, to be perfectly just it was erected to separate East and West Germany. Basic, right? Why? Well, between 1949 and 1961, about 2.5 million East Germans fled to West Germany. Now, that might not be your second why. So we've got people who definitely use the 5 whys. Abdurrashid says, I do it with my club. Ray says 5 whys once in a while. Absolutely. Arvin says many of the software companies use the 5 whys in doing root cause analysis. Yeah, absolutely. But what about using the 5 whys for Chesterton's fence? Now, we all might come up with, even root cause analysis, we know the 5 whys. We come up with different kinds of 5 whys. So let's keep going. Why did 2.5 million East Germans try to flee to West Germany between 1949 and 1961? Well, to find work, right? Why? Well, the East German economy wasn't working, so the people fled. Why was the fence erected? Why again? Because many of the people that were fleeing East Germany to West Germany were highly skilled workers, intellectuals, professionals. And finally, why? It threatened to destroy the economic viability of the East German state. So how did the wall come down? Was it a decision? Was it really Ronald Reagan saying to Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall? Yeah, not so much. Makes for a nice story. Really makes for a nice story, especially here in the United States. But, in October of 1989, East Germany's leadership was forced from power during the wave of democratization that swept through Europe. And on November 9th, the East German government opened the country's borders with West Germany, including West Berlin, and the openings were made in the Berlin Wall through which East Germans could travel freely to the West. The wall stopped functioning as a political barrier between the East and West, and therefore was eventually taken down. So what would Chesterton's fence require doing before removing that wall? Does it mean that if you can find a reason, you wouldn't remove the fence? No. Chesterton, and this is where it kind of deviates from this political conservatism and liberalism, reformer versus conservative. It's not that you can't, if you find reason for it, you can't remove it. The point is, you can find good reason, legitimate reason that a fence or policy or law was constructed, even if it was morally repugnant, but you understand the reason. I mean, I don't mean good reason as a moral judgment, a reason that made sense at the time to whoever constructed it. Maybe they were morally wrong. They were prejudiced or racist or sexist. That's not, but that doesn't mean that you should just take it down without identifying those reasons. And that is really the point of Chesterton's wall, a fence. But we have another parable, equally interesting. So Abderrachid said, questioning the reason why the wall was built. And why not? Is there harm in questioning the reason why the wall was built in a way where you are really searching for truthful reasons before evaluating whether those reasons were right or wrong at the time, or whether those reasons are right or wrong now? That comes after evaluating the reasons. So even when people agree to construct or institute or add things, they don't always agree for the same reasons. So we might say, oh, they were a bunch of racists, or they're a bunch of sexists, or they're a bunch of this or that. And, that may be very true. But each individual person, we all individually have our own reasons, maybe for economic advancement, or maybe for, whatever the reasons that are in our heart and soul that we wanted at the time. It's totally unfair to assume that there was one reason that every single person who voted and constructed the wall between East and West Germany, that they all agreed on the exact reason. Here's what Chesterton says. Suppose that a great commotion arises in the street about something. Let's say a lamppost. I like this example, which many influential persons desire to pull down. So it could be, you might want to use a modern day statue of someone who's controversial. A gray-clad monk, who is the spirit of the Middle Ages, is approached upon the matter and begins to say in an arid manner of the schoolman, so basically pontificating, let us first consider, my brethren, the value of the light. If light be in itself good. At this point, he is somewhat excusably knocked down. All the people make a rush for the lamppost. The lamppost is down in 10 minutes, and they go about congratulating each other on their unmedieval practicality. But as some things go on, they do not work out so easily. Some people have pulled the lamppost down because they wanted the electric light. Some because they wanted the old iron. Some because they wanted darkness, because their deeds were evil. Some thought it not enough of a lamppost, some too much. Some acted because they wanted to smash municipal machinery, some because they wanted to smash something. And there is war in the night, no man knowing whom he strikes. So gradually and inevitably, today, tomorrow, or the next day, there comes back the conviction that the monk was right after all, and that all depends on what the philosophy of the light. Only what we might have discussed under the gas lamp, we must now discuss in the dark. So I love that even kind of erudite example that really shows that people do things for all kinds of reasons, and it's easy to think that we're all doing it for the same reason. So Abderrachid says, yeah, that's the thing. We judge previous fences based on the current circumstances and current reasoning, but how about questioning the fence based on the previous reasoning? That's going to get a rubber chicken. And there's no suggesting that the previous reasoning has to be right or wrong. And it's also hard because maybe a lot of people were doing the same exact thing for a lot of different reasons. So should we consider the judgment of previous generations if it's easy to see how they were foolish or prejudiced or racist? Does not understanding something mean that it must be pointless? Like, I don't understand how people thought that. Does it mean that it's pointless to try to understand? All right, so let's say you're getting rid of a hierarchical organization. Remember there was a whole big trend. How many of you were in a company where they evaluated, oh, we're going to get rid of the hierarchy. We're going to make these more flat organizations, holocratic. There was a big move to holocratic structure because the hierarchical structures places too much stress on those. It gives too much stress to those on the bottom and can even be damaging to their health. It leaves room for abuse of power and manipulative company policies, and it makes it unlikely that good ideas from those at the bottom will get listened to. So you want a hierarchy-free company. How many of you think that's kind of interesting? I kind of think it's interesting. So here's the deal. Do you have to know the benefits of a non-hierarchical structure And that's enough to remove the hierarchical structure. As long as you know the benefits of a flat structure, a holacratic structure, is that enough to remove the hierarchical structure? Or does Chesterton's fence suggest that you must look at why these hierarchical structures were put in the first place? Well, to keep the bottom down. Sure. Why else? Deeper. Go from the obvious moral to deeper kinds of things, and you will see that there might be some reasons that go beyond racist or sexist norms or something like that, which are legitimately reasons as well. So what about the fact that hierarchical systems address the need to make decisions and be held responsible, make decisions, and people need to be held responsible for those consequences? Or that during times of stress, this is the truth, or disorganization, people naturally look to leaders for direction. And without a formal hierarchy, people often formed invisible ones that were more complex to navigate and led to the more charismatic or domineering individual taking control rather than the most qualified. So it's cool that hierarchy-free holacratic companies like shoe company Zappos took the risk inherent in breaking the mold and removing that hierarchical structure and adopting the holacratic structure, I think like in 2014. And another example is the Medium, the blogging platform Medium. They got rid of their hierarchical structure and made a flat structure. So did their approach ignore Chesterton's fence and fail to address why hierarchies exist within companies in the first place? Maybe. Because in 2016, Medium's former head of operations, Andy Doyle, eventually wrote, as much as we admire the philosophy, his business had found of the flat structure, his business had found that this flat structure was getting in the way of work. And other companies found that their employees needed more management guidance than they were receiving with the holacratic structure. People avoided asking important and difficult questions. One executive summed it up by saying, it is counterintuitive, but in a flat hierarchy, you don't need less structure. In fact, you need more and stricter rules. So this is an example of maybe going back to Chesterton's fence. Now, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't pull out the hierarchy, but you might replace it with something that can address some of the things, or you are aware of the second and third order consequences. So isn't this like we should just always do things the way we've always done it? So this is where the parable of Gordian's knot comes in. How many of you, I hadn't heard of Gordian's knot. It was just in preparation for today's talk that I found out about Gordian's knot, because I had heard of Chesterton's fence, but I had not heard of Gordian's knot. Any of you heard of Gordian's knot? So this is a parable that's used to describe complex or unsolvable problems. And I think it kind of is like maybe seen as the opposite of Chesterton's fence, but it traces back to a legendary chapter in the life of Alexander the Great, the Macedonian conqueror. So as the story goes, in 333 BC, Alexander marched his army into the capital of Gordium in modern-day Turkey. And upon arriving in the city, he encountered an ancient wagon that had belonged to Gordius, who was the father of King Midas. Its yoke, so tied up with this knot that one Roman historian later described as several knots, all so tightly entangled that it was impossible to see how they were fastened. So it was this big old hairy knot. Okay. An oracle had declared that any man who could unravel its elaborate knots was destined to become the ruler of all of Asia. So Alexander was instantly seized with an ardent desire to untie the Gordian knot. He wrestled with it for a time and he found no success, at which point he stepped back and proclaimed, "It makes no difference how they are loosed." Then he drew his sword and sliced the knot in half with a single stroke. So he said, screw the rules. Who imposed these rules? I'm going to untie this knot. That same night, Gordium was rocked by thunder and lightning, which Alexander and his men took as a sign that they had pleased the gods. True to the prophecy, he went on to conquer Egypt and large swaths of Asia before his death at age 32. So thanks to the enduring popularity of Alexander's fable, the phrase Gordian knot has entered the lexicon as shorthand for intricate or intractable obstacles. Is that a Gordian's knot? What can we do? So you can see how that can be at odds with Chesterton's fence. So there's nothing positive about being resistant to change. That's not really the point. Things become outdated. and redundant. We need to shake things up and find new ways, for sure. However, we can't let ourselves be too overconfident about the redundancy of things that we see as pointless. We can't assume that people before us were just dumber than us. So, which do you like best? We're going to wrap it up. Which do you like best? Okay, there's A, B, and C. So you're going to have to let me know which thing you like best as kind of a way to, kind of a good thinking takeaway from today. A, don't destroy what you don't understand. Kind of interesting. I like it. Not bad. B, once you understand why something has been added, created, or built, you can then assess whether or not to destroy it. Maybe a little clearer. Or C, once you can state at least 3 reasons why something has been added, created, or built, you are ready to assess whether or not to destroy it. Which one do you like? I like specificity, because you might come up with some moral reason. I like the idea of creating 3 reasons. You have to come up with 3 reasons why something, a policy, a fence, something was put in place before you subtracted. Why was it added? 3 reasons why it was added. Those reasons might be repugnant, might be outdated, might be horrible, but I agree. So we've got, Abdurrahman says, at what point Chesterton's fans and resisting to change fallacy meet? Exactly. But Chesterton isn't saying resist change. That's the beauty. Chesterton is saying A, B, or C. Don't destroy what you don't understand. So Arvin says B. Once you understand why something has been created. I like C. Abdurrahman likes C. Michael likes C. I like C because I like the idea of just forcing yourself not to just go with the most obvious reason. Okay, that was put in place because it's sexist. Sure. But you need 3 reasons. They can't all be a different way of saying that. So I like the idea of 3 reasons because we know that for anything that was added, people had all kinds of different reasons that we could look back on history and think that they were all agreeing. I can't even agree with my family. So Joy D says A. Okay, maybe simple. I like the specificity of requiring 3, but I understand. I think they're all good. But many problems that we face in life occur when we intervene with systems without awareness of what the consequences could be. We can easily forget that this applies as much to subtraction, tearing down the fence, as it does to addition, building the fence in the first place. If a fence exists, there is likely a reason for it, or was a reason for it. It may be for illogical or outdated or inconsequential reasons, but the reasons should always be considered, according to Chesterton. See you next week. Enjoy your week. If you come in, subscribe to YouTube, Becky Saltzman, hit that bell. Be here every week on LinkedIn. Share the video so that we can grow our good thinking community. The point is really just to have a bigger community of people who want to spend a little bit of time away from all the time we're told what to think, so we can focus on metacognition, loving and improving and interrogating how we think. Have a great week.